All right, welcome to the Briones Pickleball podcast. We are back. This is Jordan, your host. Today we have a little bit of a different episode today. Caden is actually gone. He's in Atlanta. We have our guest here, Matt Fisher, a striving professional and a critic at best or at worst. I'm not sure, Matt.
I would say a critic would be a very fair way to describe me. I don't want to say put a value term on it and say at best or at worst, but I certainly like to share my opinion and let people know how I feel about what's going on in the game right now.
Cool, man. Yeah. So for those of you watching, pickleball corruption, slave labor, lots of hot topics here, and just really the future of pickleball. There's a lot to get to. Matt, you've studied up on this. I know, like you kind of live and breathe this stuff, or at least what I'm gathering. Just before we start, you and I have met probably 2 years ago or so. What would you say?
Yeah, I think Bo introduced me to you, I believe. Yeah. And I originally had a paddle company with Bo called Maverick Paddles, and you were coaching Bo. By the way, bravo on that, because he turned from, shout out to Bo, by the way, he turned from, a pretty average singles player, in my opinion, the first time I played, and when I was an average singles player, keep in mind, to someone who, at least at some level, I feared when I went on the court with him. I was like, there's a very good chance that I could lose to this guy, because he now has the shots and the placement and the understanding of pickleball that he didn't have when he first started.
Yeah.
And myself included. But
yeah, man. So I know that we did maybe 1 or 2 drilling sessions here, but I was coaching Bo at that time. Matt here is are you an Arizona native?
I am an Arizona native.
Okay.
Yeah, born and raised in Fountain Hills.
There you go. So still in Fountain Hills.
Still in Fountain Hills, with the parents.
Okay.
Hustling, pursuing the dream. But quite frankly, even if, I'm not financially stable, but let's say I was financially stable, there's a very good argument I would still live with them. I have a great relationship with them. I wouldn't say they totally support me. I think there's been multiple conversations in which are like, look, we get you're pretty decent at pickleball, but at the same time, like, you're clearly not paying the rent. You're not paying the bills right now. And so I sympathize with them on that. But yeah, born and raised in Fountain Hills.
Okay, awesome. So Matt here is definitely one of the top singles players here, to my knowledge, at least, Matt. And you, there's a lot, pickleball since we've met. It's been 2 years, but pickleball has grown. It's grown pretty dramatically, even since we started hitting and hit those few times. But yeah, we're just gonna, let's just start here, Matt. Just like your little State of the Union address here, just like a glimpse of who you. We just found out who you are, but just like what are some of the things we want to address today, and why your voice counts, and also, I'm sure a lot of people would agree with what you say, and back you up on that.
Well, I guess my State of the Union address would really be that right now what we've seen in pickleball is a massive influx of money. And once you bring money and financial motives into a sport, you bring specific type of people or specific type of institutions that only go towards what makes sense financially, right? There's 2 rules of business. One is maximize your profits. The second is maximize your market share. And in my opinion, that's kind of what we're seeing as far as not just the corporations that exist within pickleball, but also the governing bodies, or I should put that in quotations, the governing bodies that are emerging out of pickleball. For an example, when you look at USA Pickleball and the way it's structured as a nonprofit. I don't know how much money actually goes towards this nonprofit type of model, but it's pretty clear that they do still have financial incentives, and it's pretty clear that, like virtually every single corporation, they're closely interlocked with other corporations, right? So what we're seeing right now with the emergence of UPA is two business parties kind of beginning to form, which, by the way, is the exact same thing that, like, let's say the Democrats and the Republicans have. They have two business parties in which are trying to project their own interests. And most of the time when you're trying to project your own interest, you don't really care about the effect that it has on other people, right?
Got it. So what are these two, I guess, what are these two government bodies then?
Well, so USA Pickleball and UPA, they both represent different people, right? I don't know exactly who they represent, but it's pretty clear that the PPA and the UPA are tied together. It's pretty clear that the APP and USA Pickleball are tied together. We're starting to even see, for an example, Selkirk and Yola kind of separate themselves, right? You know, Yola or Selkirk, actually, you know, it's the famous email, right, where it kind of talks about, like, you know, basically, what are you guys doing? And they're basically saying to UPA that what's happening as far as the fact that you guys have kind of come out here and put this huge number on what it takes to get a paddle approved, which the number I heard was $100,000. Which, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to realize what that's going to do. It's going to do a lot of things. One, it's going to increase the price of paddles for the consumer.
Yeah, right? So you want to explain that really quick? So there was is it the UPA?
UPA, I think it's...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's technically UPAA. And so, like I was saying, you know, specific paddle companies are starting to probably go a little bit more towards them. Other paddle companies are starting to go a little bit more towards USA Pickleball. Yeah,
but the $100,000.
Sorry.
Yeah, why don't you explain that real quick?
So, for an example, let's take what's happening right now. USA Pickleball, I think it costs. Actually, I don't think it costs. I know for a fact it costs $1,500 for your first paddle approval, and then $500 for a manufacturer's account. So let's say I come and I say, hey, I want to get this paddle approved, USA Pickleball approved. Well, then I go through that process. I send them 6 paddles in. They test the paddles. They say, do these paddles pass or do these paddles fail? They give you the results back, and if they do, you know, you're on the list. You can play tournaments with this, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, if you send 6 paddles in and you're not a complete idiot, what you're going to do is, in what we're seeing happening, is you're going to send 6 paddles in that you know for a fact are going to pass. And then the rest, whoever, 10,000, right? The next 10,000 that you put out could be illegal, right? Yeah. And so Gearbox and Yola are the best examples of this. Virtually every single paddle fails at some level, right? If they test it enough. I shouldn't say every single paddle company, virtually, I'm sure there's some exceptions, have a paddle in which at some point in time has failed. But when we look at the massive culprits of this, you can start with Gearbox and then you can go to Yola, right? So Gearbox, for an example, I know plenty of gear. In fact, I don't know one Gearbox that's actually passed in a pro tournament when tested.
So where's that from?
That's from myself. I mean, I had a gearbox, or I didn't have a gearbox. Somebody gave me a gearbox because I didn't like.
And then did they test it at the tournament you're at?
So then they tested it and they said, "Hey, look, this failed. We're gonna keep this paddle, and you can get it after the tournament."
So what happens to the match if they test it after? Well,
that's a great question. If they test it after, I'm pretty sure the results stand. Now.
The results stand.
So let's say I play with a gear. Well, I mean, first, if it's not a pro tournament, which I think is the vast majority of people.
Okay.
So if it's not a pro tournament, what's going to happen is you're going to come in with a gearbox, or you're going to come in with a Yola. It's not going to be tested. There's a very high chance it passes, and you're playing with a paddle that is by definition against the rules in a tournament that claims to abide by these rules. Not to mention to the fact that what's happening is they're charging people money to abide by these rules when they have absolutely no ability to regulate them.
Yeah. So there's several problems here, but let's go back to the pro though. So what happens though when a paddle the match is over, the paddle is tested, confiscated, and it doesn't pass?
Then at the end of the tournament, you just go back and you get it. And in fact, I've actually heard how a paddle will pass or a paddle will fail at one tournament, and then that same exact paddle the next tournament passes. And so it's like even the testing process is quite strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what happens. Your paddle fails. It's held for the extension of the tournament. Then after the tournament is done, you go back and you get it.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of moving parts here. There is the actual regulations, how they regulate things. It's the testing process. So that's very, very different all across the board, or maybe it's different. How much do you think it actually has to do with the materials that are used hitting a plastic ball in different weather? Because obviously there's paddles that probably do pass and are within legal limits, but whether it's getting hot, or maybe it just like weather-wise, or maybe it gets broken in, then dimensions or specifications change.
Well, you brought up actually a really interesting point, which I've had this argument with 3 different people, which is the fact that, like you mentioned, when it's cold outside, paddles tend to have less of a chance of failing deflection. I don't know the exact science behind it, but it does make a lot of sense. Like, heat expands, cold contracts, right? So when you test a paddle that's cold, it tends to not deflect off the paddle as much as it would if it's hot. So in fact, all 3 of these people, I won't mention them by name, but I think that they're relatively moral people. And we had the argument about should you, if you're using the Yola Mod 2.5 is what we were talking about. They basically said, hey, look, everybody is using the mod, or they're not everybody, but people are using the mod 2.5, and what they're doing is they're putting it into the freezer or the refrigerator before they get it tested in order to get it past the testing booth, right? And so they made the argument like, look, people are doing it. If I don't do this, I'm at an unfair advantage. Therefore, I'm going to do it. Well, two out of 3 said they were going to do it. One I talked to, and he kind of came off of it. He was like, "Look, I actually get what you're saying." And my argument is like, I think that's by definition cheating, right? Like, I don't think there's really any argument around it. I think that if you know, or let's say you think, because that's where it is, if you think that a paddle is going to fail, but you take a precaution to not allow that paddle to fail by putting it in the freezer and getting it past this first checkpoint, then after that first checkpoint, it heats up and now it's illegal again.
Sure.
I can't think of any other way to describe it. There's obvious, let's say you should get it tested after. I think almost every single tournament should, if they could. I get it. There's financial reasons why they can't. But, if you really wanted to be secure about the paddles, at the high level, you could have it tested after every single match, right? So if somebody does that freezing technique, okay, well, they can't do it in the middle of a match. So when it should be tested is ideally at the exact time that it's playing, which you don't want to do.
So you're saying right before the match?
I'm saying right after the match.
Okay, but here's the problem with that too, and maybe we'll get into kind of this situation or kind of discussion, but there is a sense of paddles, and maybe it's not even YOLA, but maybe certain paddles are within limits. And I guess this is what I'm saying. The paddle companies, most of them today, or a lot of them, are already so close to the border, right? That without a freezer, let's say without a refrigerator, let's just say room temp, let's say like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And it passes. Yeah. But weather gets hot, you're hitting fast hands, and it does heat up, and then it fails. So inherently, we either need to change something, or what is the solution for that?
I get what you're saying.
What would that be?
Let's take some paddle that isn't gearbox or isn't
Got it.
Yola, and let's say it's a Selkirk, or which a lot of the, like say it's a Selkirk Halo. I'm not super familiar with their testing, which by the way, I think USA Pickleball has an obligation to release testing in order to create an informed consumer, but that's kind of another issue.
Are they not currently?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, it says confidential online, but there are reports of like not what paddles, but how many paddles are failing, but we have no idea except from like peer to peer of like, hey, look, my Selkirk failed. Oh, hey, look, my Yola failed. Oh, hey, look, my gearbox failed. That's the only real information that we have. And so what's happening when you come and buy a paddle, if you're an uninformed consumer, you could buy, in fact, I know specific examples where this has literally happened. Yeah. They go and they buy the Yola 2.5 and they think, oh, sweet, like this has a ton of power, which it does for a reason. They're cheating, right? And then they go to a tournament and they're using the Yola 2.5 in the qualifiers. They get past the qualifiers and then it fails. I don't know that. Sorry, I shouldn't say I know a specific example where that's happened, but I do know a specific example where somebody bought a Yola 2.5, played with it, and then realized, oh, really? This doesn't pass, so I might not be able to use this in a pro tournament, which I think is a huge mistake on Yola's part, right? Like, you have a responsibility to the players who play with your paddle to abide by what you claim you abide by. I mean, it's false advertising, right? If you say this paddle passes USA Pickleball's regulations and it doesn't actually pass, like I said, I don't think there's any way to say that that's not saying something that is untrue. But going back to your original point, which I think was a really good point, which was the fact that during a match, it could alter what happens. And in that specific situation, I sympathize with them, but at the same time, I think to myself, is there a better alternative, right? Because before a match, you can still have a frozen paddle, right? You can still go like, let's say, shoot, a match is coming. All right, put it in my cooler, and then it's good before the match, but by the time the match is done, well, now it fails. Yeah. So I think it's not a stretch if individuals take responsibility for what they're doing. Informed individuals. Like, I sympathize with the people who have no idea that, let's say, Gearbox or Yola, and I'm sorry to keep mentioning Gearbox and Yola because there's plenty of others, but they're just the most obvious examples. I think that if you were to test paddles after the match, it would influence people to not use paddles that are illegal, because
it would only influence them if there was a penalty for that.
If there was a penalty, and
right, so because like if they test them and then they just go on to the next match and then they confiscate that paddle and then they use another one, then it's just another freezer paddle.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And so again, I haven't thought about this like super deeply, but there definitely should. I mean, if they were to come out, if USA Pickleball is to come out and say, hey, look, we're going to test everybody's paddle after the match, and if it fails, that match, you're disqualified, you lose that match, I would say fair enough. You used a paddle. And
that is the problem, and then we can get to more of the bigger problem, Matt, but there's so many paddles, and you're mentioning Gearbox and Yola, and sometimes their paddles fail, sometimes they pass, but like you said, there's lots of companies out there that paddles would actually fail under the right climate. We should say that, in the right amount of hitting.
Sure.
So if they were just to, let's say the pros were just, it's hard to backtrack it. I guess what I'm saying right now, as it stands, let's say that given the PPA, because obviously Caden's in this podcast. He plays with Yola, but there's a lot of players that play with different paddles. But if they were to test right now in the pro circuit, paddles failed, and then you don't move on or whatever, half of the paddles would be off the market. So all the sponsored players. So I don't know if that's actually feasible for a governing body. And this is my criticism. I don't know what they can do except set a date for a future date, which I think might be happening, right? But way in advance, so that these companies actually get some time to prep for that. But also, like, because they're going to have to come out with something else, or the regulations are going to have to change.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah. And so you brought up a lot of great points. One was it would fail under specific circumstances. It would also fail under non-specific circumstances, right? It would fail whether the weather was hot or cold, because some paddles are that juiced up, right?
True. But all of them aren't.
But all of them aren't. No, there are, there is a small margin, and I don't know which ones, but there is a small margin that if you played, like we mentioned, in 110-degree heat, or you went and played in 60 degrees somewhere else, that could alter it.
Sure.
And so then that kind of brings up the point, and what you briefly mentioned, which is like, how do you regulate it in the first place? Well, it's a really difficult task, right? Because what we've seen, and which I've already mentioned, is USA Pickleball's inability to regulate, let's take YOLO for an example, because they fear them. And I get why. They don't have the money to put up to fight the lawsuit that they're doing right now. So it's kind of like ban our paddles, will come after you, and you don't have those resources. And so what's happening is it's almost like, and I hate to use such a strong analogy, but it's almost like the spider wasp and the tarantula, in which all these paddle companies have basically paralyzed USA Pickleball and have forced, it's not really USA Pickleball regulating them. It's like, hey, we're going to do what we want. USA Pickleball, you can do nothing about it. Smile, support us. And, if you're lucky, we'll give you some, we'll donate some money to you and we'll support your cause. But
yeah, it's tough, man. It's a tough situation for sure.
It is. And so, there are movements and decentralized movements, very small and very localized, in which are promoting specific, because by the way, this is already what's going on right now.
Okay.
Is specific movements are creating their own rules for pickleball, or in Anarchy Pickleball situation, there are no rules whatsoever. Because if you remove the rules, then you remove cheating whatsoever.
Yeah.
So,
really good point. So, this is the way, again, I'm a coach, that as I'm coaching, I like to keep things really simple, but get to the point and try to find the solution right away.
Sure.
So the way I see it here is there's so many moving parts. We have a plastic ball, we have materials that could go in, could go out of a whack depending on temperature. So I came from tennis. Matt, we could get to your background later on. You played a ton of tennis. Based on my knowledge, tennis rackets at least, I don't think currently there are any regulations. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there are. Obviously, there's different strings that you can put on it, and then I don't even know if there's a surface area. I'm not even sure if there's even a legal limit, because that would help that would lose control. But what I'm saying, I guess the point I'm getting to is, because it's off of strings, it's a lot different. Cord is bigger. But the only way here's the main problem, because the regulations and the testing is very, very, it's very new, I guess, right?
Sure.
And then for the paddles, because I see it one of two ways, like they have to, either the actual regulation and testing has to be on point, which is just not there, or they're going to have to, again, we've talked about, other podcasts have talked about the balls, maybe softening those up. But really, it's going to be really hard now to peel back the power paddles now, because it's an influx on the market. So I don't know, man. There's a lot there.
Yeah, and so again, you brought up great points. One, what we're seeing as far as the Anarchy Pickleball movement goes is they basically said exactly what you just said, which is you can't regulate pickleball. Nobody can. Let's say even you brought in the most powerful people in the world. You can never prevent me from just going and getting a Chinese manufacturer to create a paddle for me, me putting USA Pickleball stamp on it without even going through them, going to the park and playing with it. It's not kind of easy. It's like anybody with a computer can do it.
Yeah.
Right? And so they don't control production. USA Pickleball nor UPA control production. So they'll never be able to truly regulate paddles. What we'll see, in my opinion, with UPA is almost the exact same thing that we're seeing with USA Pickleball, which is paddles that don't abide by their rules and regulations out on the market totally. So I am an advocate for Anarchy Pickleball. I'm also an advocate for the International Pickleball Safety. And where these two separate, they're very similar as far as the decentralization of it. Because what's happening now is the same way governments have lobbyists and special interest groups, these companies, which I've already briefly mentioned who they are, have their specific people that they're projecting their interest and ignoring the interests of, the people. I mean, it's not even a democracy, right? If we want to get serious about it, like what type of structure is USA Pickleball? It's as close to totalitarianism as you can possibly get. I mean, if you're a member of USA Pickleball, you have virtually no say in what goes on in that company. Maybe a small select group of influential people who own paddle companies or who are, the CEO of some big corporation that donates to them has influence, but it's certainly not the people. It's certainly not the members, right? And so when we look at the structure and we look at what should be done, I don't think there's, you kind of alluded to it briefly, I don't think there's really any need to have that type of hierarchy structure. I think, one, if you want to go by Anarchy Pickleball, which is like every single paddle, no matter what it is, goes out on the market and you can play with it, which, by the way, is kind of what we already have right now, just disguised as some... disguised as USA Pickleball, and their, again, financial incentives to test paddles in which they never regulate. I mean, I can't tell you how many paddles I've seen that have the stamp of USA Pickleball on them, that even just like by me playing with it. And same, I mean, I don't want to throw people under the bus, but like pros that I've played with are, they're saying the same exact thing. They're like, dude, it's like a joke. We're bringing like 20 paddles to this event. My paddle passes this week, it fails next week. And so, quite frankly, they're such a small fraction of the total number of pickleball players in the United States or worldwide, I guess, that matters to, right? So you say, and so you say, as far as Anarchy Pickleball goes, what negative impact would it have? I think the only argument of the negative impact that it would have is deflection, right? Because what's going to happen is, again, you're correct, the power paddles aren't going away, right? And even if...
unless regulations limit it.
Sure,
right?
But even if they limit it, like... one, I mentioned the YOLO lawsuit. Let's say they do go after Gearbox next. Okay, they don't want to deal with that. They can't. They financially can't deal with it, for one, but they just don't want that problem. So when they see Gearbox, which they have, they know this. They know Gearbox fails almost every single time it's tested, right? So why don't they ban it? It's pretty, well, maybe they're in bed with them, but the most likely situation is they just can't. They can't regulate paddles. Therefore, they shouldn't regulate paddles. And
so anarchy pickleball, like you mentioned, just really simple, is just allowing just anything, and that's cut and dry. That's actually that makes sense. Yeah. And actually, like when it comes to rec play, it really doesn't matter, right? We're like you said, a very small percentage. If you're watching this and listening to this and you don't care about this talk, then that's fine. You can move on and watch our last podcast. But so that's Anarchy Pickleball. It only really matters with the pros, and because everyone wants to play on fair terms, and I want to get to that next. Yeah. But so that's Anarchy. What is the opposite of that again? You said there's another group. Well, so what is the opposite of the Anarchy Pickleball, which is no rules and regulations?
Well, the one that I mentioned isn't the opposite of it. It just has one rule, and that one rule is like watch out for deflection, because they do admit that like there is potential if you have a power paddle to create an eye injury. Right.
Sure.
In which I sympathize with that. I think singles is a very, very low situation. I think there's always associated risks with any sport. But and then also I think if Anarchy Pickleball, in which they have, by the way, if they want to be taken serious, they need to really promote eyewear. Because if that comes out and like, you have all these power paddles that are just juiced out, which again, we already kind of have. And I've made an illegal paddle that's like extremely illegal that actually says not approved on it. And quite frankly, I don't think most people would want that type of power. I think that type of power is a little bit difficult to control, and I don't feel like it necessarily makes me a better player, especially on singles. Doubles, maybe. But singles, I just can't put the ball on the court. And
do you wear eye protection?
If I'm playing outdoors, I wear my sunglasses mostly because of the sun.
Okay.
But if I play indoors, I don't wear eye protection. Although I probably should.
Yeah.
And so where these two differ is international pickleball is still decentralized, meaning like anybody can go out and put it on their paddle and say, we abide by these rules, and the responsibility gets shifted from USA Pickleball or UPA to the individual, which already had the responsibility, because it's not up to USA Pickleball if Gearbox goes and doesn't abide by their rules. That's still on the individual. It just is masking it, and it looks like it's on USA Pickleball, but it's not. So it's kind of the same philosophy, except one, they don't charge people money to, promote their paddle. It's just an idea.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what people should do. And it depends who you are. Maybe you have a different philosophy and you say, we don't care about the power. Okay, well then, go ahead and support Anarchy Pickleball, right? And which allows every single paddle to go out there, and anybody can play with it. Except then, again, at least at some point it might be nice to mention, hey, I have this paddle, and maybe the same thing should be said if you're playing doubles against Gearbox or Yola.
Yeah.
Hey, look, I have this paddle. It's very powerful. Therefore, kind of like play at your own risk. If you think this ball is going to come back 100 miles per hour, you're probably wrong. So I think if you wanted to get serious about it, you could say, and you can get serious about it with the rules that already exist now. What happens when a 12-year-old comes up and she goes, Mom, I got hit in the eye with a pickleball and I can't see out of this eye? Okay, that has happened already, I'm sure. I mean, it's happened in tennis many times. It's happened in other sports many times.
Yeah.
But what happens when that paddle is a Gearbox or a Yola that fails deflection? Okay, well, one, you might have a lawsuit on your hands. Two, because these paddles decided to go against this specific rule and regulation that I don't believe was put in place for safety of players. I think it was put in place because it financially benefits USA Pickleball. But it does do both. But I think if that happens, if that 12-year-old comes to their mom and they say, I got hit in the eye with the pickleball, well, who's responsible now? I mean, there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well,
everyone would be pointing fingers probably at that point, right?
Exactly. Right. And so, if you wanted to say it was because of Anarchy Pickleball, kind of would be fair. You would say, okay, look, if they actually abided by the rules of regulation of, let's say, UPA, USA, which they don't, by the way, I think that's important to remember. If they did abide by the rules of USA Pickleball, UPA Pickleball, or the International Pickleball Safety, okay, well, that deflection would be not okay. And what International Pickleball says is, look, you guys have a responsibility to others. You need to come out and you need to use a deflection in which is not going to hurt somebody else.
So what is the I mean, we talked about tests. We talked about different methods of, actually being accurate in testing. Is the deflection test right now even accurate? Probably
not. I would bet probably not. The specific situation in which the professional player that I talk, and he could be lying, I don't know. But the specific player that I talked to, I'm pretty sure his paddle failed as far as grit goes. So he took a paddle to one tournament and it failed on grit, and then he took it to the next tournament, it passed, and I think he actually took it to another tournament, it failed. So it was like pass, fail, pass, But I think if we look at pickleball as a whole when it comes to testing, still only a small fraction of paddles are being tested, and the professional players kind of understand. I mean, or just look at the reports, right? I think it says 65% of paddles failed in Atlanta. That's a huge on deflection. That's a huge number. So I guess that answers your question a little bit more.
Yeah.
65% of paddles failed, and that was before the Gearbox and the Yola were released. It might even be more extreme now.
Yeah. No, man. So there's a lot going on here. Where do you? So let's say you're in power, Matt.
Okay.
How do you even solve it? We got basically what you're saying. Basically, it's the paddle companies versus the governing bodies, and it's kind of like a stalemate. They can't really do anything, and then you have all the amateurs and players alike. I guess it really doesn't matter to them. But the other part and the other piece, obviously, we have the pros that are trying to do this for a living. They're fighting for every dollar, and we'll get to your pro journey a little bit later on. But there's a lot of moving parts here. So what can be done? And we talked about this a little bit before going live, but what do you actually think is a solution, or might not even be a solution, just a step in the right direction that would actually be feasible?
I think shifting the responsibility from profit-seeking institutions like UPA, USA Pickleball, any paddle company, to the individual is the only way that we get by paddles not failing. Because if you're an informed consumer, you don't have a responsibility. But if you abide by international pickleball safety, you have the responsibility. They put the responsibility on the individual. So they say, look, you are responsible, because most people know, like if you and I mean, not just you and I, like rec players, like when I give my paddle that's super illegal to even like the lowest level players, they go, oh my goodness, this is absurd. It's noticeable, right? So you as an individual are responsible for playing with a paddle that is legal. That's what International Pickleball Safety says, and that's what I would agree with, if that's the route we want to go.
Got it. So you're just saying putting it on the individual based on deflection, right? And you're saying, so a real tournament, real life scenario, right?
Yeah.
We got people playing, and then paddle fails after, and what happens to that match?
I think they should be forfeited. It shouldn't count. And
okay.
Yeah.
So what happens to what? So we'll go down every scenario, but what happens to the players that are signed by YOLO, Gearbox, etc.? They literally have nothing to play with. Then what do they do?
Then they look at the people who are sponsoring them, and they say, "What are you guys doing?" And they hold them responsible.
Okay.
They say,
but that's not a quick fix, right? Because they're not going to have paddles in hand, maybe that are even passing. I mean, would that be a realistic thing? Let's say you're signed, so play devil's advocate, right? Yeah. And you actually, and here's the thing too, right? I honestly think, I mean, I've heard a lot of things, but Ben Johns is, I don't think, an advocate of superpower paddles. Okay. I think he finally started playing with the new ones, because he was playing with the Gen 2 for a very long time. But we can get into that. Obviously, they've been on a losing streak recently and things like that. But you're Ben Johns, or not even Ben Johns, you're some pro player. There's literally nothing that you can play with that passes, and that will take obviously a lot of time to get something that actually passes approved.
Sure.
So that's I don't know, what would you do in that situation?
And so let's say I am that player that has 20 paddles and none of them pass, which the situation that you've said actually exists, right? It's people come to tournaments and they're like, we can't play. Like, what are you guys doing? You know what I mean? I'm a great example. If I only had the Gearbox, I would be a great example. I went to the tournament, it failed. I could try to hold Gearbox accountable, but they don't really care that much about what I say. No. They're more focused on the fact that everybody loves their paddle because it's illegal, and they don't really care about the professional players. I don't know if any, are there any sorry, I'm going a little bit off topic, but are there any mainstream players that are playing with the Gearbox currently that you can think of? The one that fails, I forget the exact name.
Well, there's no, to my knowledge, there's really no top pros that I could think of that are signed by Gearbox, because they're all signed already. Yeah.
So to answer your question, if I'm that player who has 5 paddles and none of them pass, one, that exists already, right? And if that happens to me, I'm quite upset. I'm quite upset not only at USA Pickleball for not being able to regulate them. I'm also upset with Gearbox, or whoever it is. Let's say it's not Gearbox. I'm upset with my paddle company, and I say, hey, guys, why are you creating paddles that don't pass, giving it to me, and I'm not able to play the tournament. And by the way, I think I should be a little bit more clear on my position. Let's say for the vast majority of tournaments, there are no testing, so that totally falls on the individual, right? Because you'll never know. But if you are playing a professional tournament, you can be a little bit more loose, right? You can say, I want to play by the rules, right? I think that's what first should enter your mind. I want to play by the rules. Therefore, if I think my paddle might fail, I want to know. So if I go, and I would advocate test it at the beginning. Okay, does it pass or does it fail? Okay, it passes. Now, also test it after the match, because the reason it passed would potentially be because of freezing the paddle. But let's say it did pass and it wasn't because of my paddle freezing, and it was because just during that match it heated up. Yep. Yeah, that's a really unfortunate situation. But yet still, I would be under I would rather, this is just me personally, I would rather lose knowing that if I was playing with an illegal paddle and I won, I would feel worse than I would if I lost. Meaning, if that line was crossed during that, one, I think it's the responsibility, again, of myself to know, hey, look, here's the limit. Make sure you're not right around there. Be sure that your paddle is going to pass. Don't go out and, if they come back with the deflection and they say hey, by the way, you're 0.001 off. You can take the risk. You want to go into that match and then afterwards get disqualified for it. Be our guest, but at the same time, don't be surprised, right? So hopefully in the specific situation I just created, the avoidance, if somebody actually wants to abide by the rules, which is they get their paddle tested, it passes, they give them the numbers back, which by the way, it's so secretive. I mean, I asked for the numbers, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but they did kind of tell me. And this was the crush paddle. The crush paddle, they were it passed with flying numbers as far as deflection goes. And that tournament didn't even test for grit, so Lord knows how many paddles actually failed the grit test. It just wasn't tested. And also keep in mind, it's very easy if you're USA Pickleball and if you're in bed with USA Pickleball and they go, hey, yep, we hired the testing guys. Oh, by the way, they're not testing for grit. So free for all this weekend, give your players the juiced up grit paddles because there's no testing, right? And so in that specific situation, I'm torn. Well, I'm not torn, but in that specific situation, when it comes to professional players, and because of I don't want to use too harsh words, but because of the corruption or incompetence, one or the other, of USA Pickleball, we're seeing people able to cheat the system and get away with it. For an example, if I was on the board of USA Pickleball and it's possible that let's take lobbyists literally write, it's not even they influence them. They sometimes literally write legislation for senators to just sign and pass off. So it's not an extreme thought that
that there's pickleball lobby?
Yeah, well, no, that Yola literally said, or let's not take Yola, let's say paddle company on the board of PPA said, hey, this weekend we're not going to test for grit. They made that rule, and then they were the ones who just gave a bunch of illegal paddles as far as grit goes to their players. Now, I'm not saying that that's happened. I have no clue if it actually has, but it could have. And
so obviously a lot of this comes down to morality, ethics, those kinds of things.
Yes.
Now, here's a situation. This is and I've been talking to some pro players, and obviously the scene, YOLA's a big thing, power paddles in general, right? Yeah. But we'll talk about unfair advantage, and we'll just talk about just fair playing field, because at the end of the day, right, the pros, I think at least the majority of them, right, want a fair playing field.
Yes. Yeah.
I would agree. I think most players want that.
Yeah.
Right. And in any sport, it doesn't really matter what you're playing. You are going to use the best technology.
Yes.
You're going to want to use anything that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And because the rules are so, it's just not set in stone. What do you think about this? The players that are winning, right? Let's just say the majority of them, and I do think the majority, obviously not all of them, but they are playing with these really powerful paddles. Doubles specifically, you talked about, I mean, obviously you play a lot of singles, Matt, but the singles, I do think it actually makes a big difference too.
Yeah.
But more of a difference in doubles. Okay. And again, if you cannot compete with that actually, and this is just me talking to different players, if you can't compete with that and you're losing money and this is everything's on the line, for you to actually equal them, you just need to play with the same kind of paddle. So just ethics of that, and just as a pro player, and like if I was in that situation, I kind of see both sides. Obviously, no one really, you don't want to cheat on your way through, but if the basically here's the standard, right? But the standard is actually here.
Yeah.
So everyone just plays up to that standard, which is, to your point, kind of like Anarchy Pickleball. So maybe it is fair, in a way. Or what do you think about that?
Well, it's fair to the extent because it's fair for specific people, right?
For the people who are signed with companies that don't have powerful paddles, that's the only ones who wouldn't be fair to. I mean, is that correct?
Correct, but also there are, I know specific people, not like a ton. And by the way, I've had this exact conversation. I think it's funny. I've had this exact conversation with a few other people about a fair playing field. Like most people, I would agree with you. Most people want a fair playing field, and the people who admittedly have thought about, let's say, freezing their paddles or cheating, they don't do it because they want to gain an unfair advantage. They do it because they understand.
They want to gain a level advantage.
They just want a fair advantage because they know other people are doing that. Sorry, by the way. Yeah, no. So I would agree with you on that. So that's a really strong argument for no rules whatsoever, right? Because what's happened, it's crazy that you have a professional tournament and you don't test for grit. That's absurd. You know what I mean? So it's either strict up the restrictions, right? Yeah. Strict up the restrictions. Do a better job at restricting the paddles, which there's like one, test for grit. Like, come on, guys. Test for grit, test for deflection at the beginning, test after every match, which again, now you're looking at financial resources just being flooded, right? And so it's like, that's not a super viable option. So I would tend to agree with you. Why have these rules in place whatsoever? Why not just allow anybody who wants to play with whatever they want to be able to play with it? And there's still, there are disadvantages of power paddles, right? It's like, there's been multiple times, specifically when I played indoors, my last tournament. Every single one was flying long. And I wasn't using a power paddle. I was using a normal one, but I'm used to playing in 110 degree heat where the ball is a marshmallow. Yeah. So I'm missing returns. But anywho, I would tend to agree with you. Like, why are there rules on paddles in the first place? And like I said, I've already mentioned it, but I'll mention it again. There's probably rules on paddles in the first place because USA Pickleball, one, they understand how much control they have by being able to regulate paddles, for one. Two, they're financially motivated, which is clear. And USA Pickleball, or in UPA, has the exact same motivations and probably the exact same mindset. Maybe they're maybe UPA will come in and hardcore testing, back and forth. But then you have to pay the price, which is a lot of money, and excluding other paddle companies. And yet still, I think the biggest issue of of everything is the fact that UPA represents specific paddle companies who don't have the interests of, one, the public, but especially not their competitors, the smaller companies. Yeah. What I'm seeing is specific organizations, in which are the wealthiest of the organizations already, now being able to basically regulate their competitors, which is, absurd, right? It's like, imagine we were playing doubles and I was the one who was able to regulate you and tell you oh, you can only practice 2 days a week. You can only do this. You can only do that. It's like, it's crazy, right? And I'm sure like any business, they understand, you know, oh, we can go after these guys, we can't go after these guys, right? Like they can go after, let's say, my paddle company, right? Because I don't have millions of dollars to throw into a lawsuit like Yola does. You know, you can't go after Yola, you can't go after Selkirk, you can't go after Head, you can't go after the big dogs. Not to mention you don't want to anyway, because every single one of these companies that I mentioned are on your board of directors. You know, you're basically in bed with them, and it goes as far as they probably own specific equity in each other's companies. You know, just like corporations that aren't pickleball related, they're all extremely interlocked.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. Lots of stuff here. It's been a pretty serious podcast.
Relatively, yeah.
Relatively. So I don't know. Drop a comment below your thoughts on pickleball corruption. Even if you care about this or not, that would be a good one.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, let's transition here, Matt.
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One more thing. If you look at Anarchy Pickleball online, you're gonna see.
Is this a website or something, or
this is
what
an
is
Instagram. This is
it's Instagram. It's an Instagram governing body.
Yeah, it's not. Well, it's not a governing body, right? It's an idea.
It's a movement.
It's a movement. Yeah, exactly. And you're gonna see a ton of paddles that don't have. I mean, a lot of paddles don't have the USA Pickleball stamp of approval on them.
Oh, on this Instagram channel.
On this Instagram page, but just in general. Like this is only a small fraction of the paddles in which don't go through USA.
You know, it'd be interesting because I don't know about this, but anyone could put the craziest sandpaper. No, but I'm just saying, like, just for example, this is my question. You can go to Home Depot, get the roughest sandpaper, and that grit would be crazy. Mm-hmm. But if someone were to make the most powerful paddle with any material that they want, like anything. Mm-hmm. How much more powerful would it be than the current Yola? You know that's a good question I have. Like, is Yola like the threshold, or is there another material that's actually like way more powerful?
So
then I would like to know, to see if that would even be possible to just go no rules.
And so Vice is a great example. EVA foam core right now is like the most powerful material. So if you look at Vice's,
but even when you hit with it, do you think a Vice comes off hotter than a Yola?
Okay, so my paddle definitely does. I've given it to multiple people, and it has EVA foam core in it.
Really?
Yeah.
So hotter than a Yola.
Hotter than the Yola.
No way.
Yeah, and it's not approved. It says not.
No,
approved.
I understand that. Yeah, but I gotta hit it, I guess.
Yeah, you do have to hit it
just to see.
Yeah.
So there are materials you're saying that are way more powerful than what's currently at the tip, which is Yola right now, right?
Correct. Although I would make the argument it's not very extreme.
Okay, so it's very minimal then.
But it's definitely noticeable. I mean, I've had multiple people who go, "This is hotter than the Yola." You know, no questions asked. But also, I would make the argument that it probably wouldn't be in most people's best interest to play with it. I play with it, one, because I have a bad elbow, and I just don't have to hit it at all. I'm basically just guiding the ball,
But that's what everyone could say.
Everybody,
bad elbow.
Everybody can say it, right? And so obviously I can never play with it in a tournament. So let's say when I played just Corey's for visual spots last weekend, I had to switch back and it hurt my elbow. But I honestly, if I was to rate my singles game with that compared to other paddles that are legal that are right around that threshold, I'd make the argument it might be even better because you with a power paddle you can't swing as hard, so you can't get as much spin. So the one thing that I noticed when I switched, the one that I switched to was I switched to two paddles. I switched to the XR, the Connor Garnett paddle, and I realized that I was getting a lot more spin because I could just swing harder. And then I switched to.
Now let's talk a little bit technique and mechanics now. Okay. So you got the most powerful paddle in the world. Let's say it's grit, right? In the one you're talking about. Now you can't swing as hard. Obviously, physics.
Yeah.
Right, it's gonna go out, but you can just dial your swing back, and then it would be it's just working less hard.
Yeah, it's just so like when you are trying to so swinging harder can get you more spin. For an example,
swinging faster,
yes. Right? But you can't swing faster with, let's say, my paddle specifically.
Yeah, I guess so.
So you can't, like, for an example, I told them, like, yo, make this, I mean, grit illegal too. Like, we're not stopping at you're not going to stop at the deflection. Like, make it super illegal. So it's past the limit on both deflection and grit.
And you did this as an experiment just to see?
I did. Or
what was your thought process on this?
Yeah, a little bit. And also because I thought to myself, why am I allowing USA Pickleball to define what type of paddle I can be able to use, right? And I thought to myself, okay, one, I mean, you can make the argument that it's hindering creativity, right? So it's like, you know, you're really set into a fine box. And I have to ask myself, like, as a paddle company owner, semi-paddle company owner, how am I going to break out of this box? Because I don't have because it's really marketing. I mean, it's hardcore marketing.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at like why paddle companies succeed, I mean, I love when you say, oh, we have the best innovation, the best technology. It's like, yeah, I've heard this, 100 times by every paddle company. No, they're all almost exactly the same. At least the vast majority of paddles are just...
the vast majority, not all of them.
Not all of them, but carbon fiber, polypropylene, like they're made with almost the exact same material. It's hard to break out of that box. So if you're going to abide by the box that USA Pickleball sets for you, okay, well, now you have to compete with everybody else who's abiding by that box, and you're really not going to be able to make a better paddle. And you don't have the marketing money that they have, and you don't have the influence they have. So like, how are you going to get your paddle to market? So my thought was like, okay, forget the box that USA Pickleball put me in. I'm just going to go outside of it.
Okay. And that's what you created.
And that's what I created. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I'm going to create the next batch. I actually have 25 and I'm using the 20. I didn't sell all of them. A lot of them I just broke because I got pissed, but I did sell quite a few of them. And I only have.
You're saying that this, it's funny because you first start off on the podcast talking about this, then you create the most illegal paddle known to man. Sure. That's basically what you did.
Yeah, that's basically
sweet.
Yeah, that's basically what I did. And so I do have a little bit of moral issue. I'd like your opinion on this.
Yeah.
Is I'm like, let's say the rec player, but I just kind of painted the picture of like what happens if YOLO gearbox hurt somebody's high. Yeah. I can make the same. I mean, I can make an even better argument for me. What happens if somebody goes out, they use my paddle? One, I think it's a little bit different because I don't say it's USA Pickleball approved. In fact, I literally in big letters say not approved. So it's like specifically being like, hey, look, like, beware. You know what I mean? If I could have everybody sign a disclaimer, I would. But if somebody comes out there and they're playing against my paddle and Nancy hits Nancy 2 in the eye and she loses her vision, I would feel quite bad about it. You know what I mean? Because I would say, I would like to know your opinion, but I would feel in part responsible because I created a paddle in which I knew had a ton of power, a ton of deflection, and I marketed it and I sold it. And I was the reason. Well, again, maybe Nancy would have got hurt if she got with a paddle that did fail, but there is a higher likely percentage if the paddle was legal, she might have had, half 0.01 seconds to get out of the way, and she would have gotten out of the way. So that's where I kind of struggle when it comes to no rules whatsoever, even though I think no rules is far better than the current structure that we have in place because it's going to get rid of the interlocked corporations not caring about externalities or not caring about their effects on others.
What are your thoughts on changing the ball completely and then
the ball?
Yeah, and then because you've heard that a lot. What are your thoughts about softening the ball? No matter however powerful it is, it's not going to come off. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually haven't heard that idea, but I like that idea.
You haven't?
I haven't heard about that idea. No, I must be out of the loop on that one.
You're in the loop with everything else, man.
I am, yeah.
So there's a theory like, just you can't change the paddle, change the ball. Make it really soft.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. First thought, I like that. And in fact, it might. If you have a softer ball, they're going to crack less too. So less plastic out to kill dolphins.
Like a jugs ball.
Like whose ball?
A jugs ball. You know the original jugs ones?
No.
The indoor ones that are really, really soft, and they're like you can do this to them.
Whoa, no.
Yeah.
No.
So no matter how hard you swing on it, well, it
Wow.
doesn't really go. It doesn't go.
That makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
if we're concerned about people's eyes, then there's a great
Yeah.
solution to it, because it's clear, right? I hate to keep reiterating the same thing. It's clear that USA Pickleball has literally no control over if paddles are actually abiding by their tests. So yeah, that's a great situation to counterbalance the potential of eye injury, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
I
interesting.
know, man. There's a lot going on. All right, so really quick, Matt. Let's shift here. Let's get to. You've been playing pickleball for about how many years now?
Good question. I think about 3 years.
So I know you have a big passion on kind of just the paddle thing, ethics, and all this kinds of stuff. But where are you with your pro pickleball game? Just give us a little background really quick. Where you are and what your aspirations are, and maybe you can share a little bit about what I'll say I guess normal pro, but a pro that is not on Championship Sunday every single week. What is that like?
So in my situation, keep in mind, this isn't me complaining. These are just kind of like facts of life, right? So what happens to a professional player like myself, and I've had top 50 wins. Like I'm not like zero. I don't have nothing, but I pay, the PPA or APP, $300. I go play. If I do really well, maybe for like 3 or 4 hours. If I do as well as I did in the last tournament, which was the Las Vegas tournament, I pay $300. I lose my first match in 25 minutes, and then I'm out. Let alone the travel costs. Let alone rental car, all these type of things. And so, for someone like myself, and there's a lot of them, right? So I'm not like, poor me, in fact, there's people who, in my opinion, are slightly lower than me that are trying to come up and be able to make a living playing pickleball. That scene, I don't think there's any other way to put it, but it's brutal, especially when you look across the net and you see somebody who is in the same situation you are, which is like, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to, pay for rent, pay for food, let alone, provide for a family or something like that, which I think is just like an internal desire that we have not everybody, but a lot of people. And so my dream is to play professional pickleball, and so is theirs, but not everybody can do this. So you're almost like looking across the net at yourself, and you're like, one of us is going to be able to, well, it's not one of us, but a specific amount of people are going to be able to live out this dream. If I beat you, I know almost without a doubt, you're going to be pissed, and you're going to go back to that hotel room, and you're just going to stare at that wall, and you're going to be unhappy. And I know that because that's the same thing that happens to me. I lose, and it's different for everybody, right? But like, for an example, like my mindset is like the Kobe Bryant mentality. It's like, I don't care how hard you work. And it's quite sick, to be honest with you. I don't care how hard you work. Like, I'm going to work harder than you. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you sacrifice this. Okay, guess what? I'm in my parents' garage, like, 6 hours a day. That's like my goal. It's like what I try to put in, and I hit that quite frequently. Not just
like training. 6 hours
exactly,
training.
yeah, and sometimes more. Not just with pickleball, but like off court stuff. So when you put in that effort and you make those sacrifices, which again, I'm not the only person who's done this. And you go to a pro qualifier and you've been doing it for, let's say, 3 years like myself. And by the way, even before those 3 years, I was doing the same thing with tennis. And tennis is almost the exact same situation. And you go there and you pay that money, you make those sacrifices, and you put in that work, and you lose. Especially like the last time I lost to a kid who in the Las Vegas tournament who was 17 years old. And
who was it?
I wish I remembered his name. If I looked it up, I would, or if I heard it, I would probably remember it. 17 years old is like, oh, I'm just like a tennis player. Like, I'm top 50 in the nation for tennis or something like this. And I'm like, I've been grinding for 3 years, and you just transitioned from tennis, and you beat me.
Yeah.
Like the number of hours, and so that's what gets to me. The number of hours that I put in compared to you, there's no argument. I would bet almost any amount of money that I've put more hours in to sports than you have. If you want to count tennis, because I think we should count tennis and maybe other sports for hours.
Yeah.
There's no argument you put in more hours at just being 17 years old. Even if you've done it since you were 8, I'm still far, far ahead of you as far as hours go. So when you lose that match, I mean, I've been depressed because of it. Like, I've gone home and I've just smashed paddles. Have tried to reevaluate my life like 100 times. Like, look, Fish, this isn't working. I know you really want it, but like, dude, you can't keep paying these absurd. And by the way, the entry fees are absurd. Like, you know, I don't know if they can lower them, but if they could, freaking lower them, man. Like $300 for 20 minutes. Like, my God, what are you guys thinking? You know, and so that's why, like, I give Corey Visual Spots like a huge shout out, because, and by the way, his prices are getting a little higher, like $125 for singles now, if you want to include like getting in.
These are local Arizona cash games, right?
Yes, yeah. But like, if you look at the players, it's like, I think in the last one it was like 7 out of 12 were like professional players, like, or people who have played professional tournaments, like Rio, myself, James, Mike, I could continue, Grant Bond, you know, a bunch of players, and I'm missing somebody. I'm missing a bunch of people, but so it is still at a high level, but at the same time, you know, I'd like your opinion on this, because I'm not sure if like you need to go into that environment of PPA and APP and feel what it's like to have, you know, professional points on the line and like have these matches really, really count. Because if I mean, for an example, I mean, Rio and I go back and forth, but the last tournament the last tournament I lost to Rio. The tournament before that I beat Rio. And so that win might have done something for me if it was in a PPA or an APP. Here in that tournament, how much does it really do for me? I'm not sure. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd like your opinion on that. Like, does a player, like if you're coaching me, does a player need to play those professional tournaments in order to get that experience and to feel that type of pressure?
So what's your goal? Just, I mean, what's your question? Do they need to feel it for training purposes?
To let's say my goal is to become the best pickleball player that I can possibly be. Yeah. Do I need, like, for an example, Venus and Serena, they took time off from tournaments. Do you need to play tournaments in order to become the best pickleball player that you can be? 2, do you need to play specific tournaments? Meaning, like, even though you have levels, and I'm losing, you know, these cash games, but do I need to feel the pressure and the intensity of the PPA, of the APP, where I know, like, I've been in draws with the top players in the world. Ben Johns, I've been in the same draw as him. Yeah. Do I need to feel that type of energy?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the hard part too, though, right? You're talking about surviving as an average pro. Obviously, Cadence on the podcast, he's doing the same kind of things, but the pressure is necessary. I mean, same thing as tennis, same thing as pickleball. You could do all the training you want, but there are different levels to everything. And as you know this, Matt, I'm sure you've gotten some games and some good points off of some of the, like you said, some of the lower tier top players. But again, until you do kind of see the same balls, see the same strategies in real time, I think that really it is necessary. Just, and I think more on a mental level, more even than actually strategic. You know,
because I have a theory. I mean, Ben Johns is obviously an incredible pickleball player, but how much does fear play a role in his success? When you go and play Ben Johns and you're sitting in front of Ben Johns, there's no doubt your heart rate is probably jacked higher than it is if you're sitting across from me, you know? And so my question is, you mentioned it, the mental aspect of it. How much of, let's say, beating a top pro is your level, is your training, is your ability to play pickleball, and how much of it is the mental side of the game, which is like dealing with fear, dealing with emotions, dealing with the fact that you must believe that you're worthy of beating Ben Johns in order, well, I guess I shouldn't say you must be, but do you need those type of feelings, the worthiness, the feeling of I deserve to win in order to succeed?
Yeah, I really do think so. I mean, it really comes down to confidence a lot of times, especially in the mental game. And I think your original question was something along the lines of, you didn't frame it like this, but how many wins, how many Ben Johns wins are the result of the fear on the other side, or collapsing, or mental collapse?
Yes.
And I would say a good amount. And I would also say that it's getting a lot less. So like you go to round of 16 in quarters.
Yeah.
I mean, Federico is the number one player right now. Now, obviously, Ben Johns beats him most of the time, but Ben has lost. He's lost quite a bit against different players, against Guang Duong, against Aoshan. I mean, there's several players that have beaten him. So the confidence, when you hop in a tournament, and as you know too, the thing with pickleball, especially in singles, I would say more so than doubles, because the margins are so slim, and it really is one or two passing shots here, a couple of net courts here.
Yep.
The margins are so slim that upsets can happen. I think more so than than doubles. But I guess what I'm saying is that confidence has a lot to do, and a lot to do with winning. And the players that have beaten Ben Johns, their confidence is extremely high. No one has beaten Ben with low confidence or belief in themselves.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I can't comment too hard on that, but I think most of what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I would say, what gives you that confidence, right? Is it like the hours you put in? Is it some higher level of belief? Is it, how do you gain that confidence, and how do you deal with because there's a ton of fears, right? Like if you play Novak Djokovic, your heart rate is probably, in fact, Connor Garnett talked about it. He was like, when I went and just warmed up with Novak Djokovic, my heart rate is jacked.
Oh, I didn't know that he warmed him up.
Yeah, he warmed me. I just watched that. In fact, I have to give a shout out to Connor Garnett. Maybe he'll see this, but I text a lot of people, and I'm like, hey man, like even just like players that are like that, in my opinion, I would probably beat, because I want to train with the best players. I want to see all different styles of games, and also I want to make connections, right? I'll text people. I'll be like, yo, let's get a session in. Nothing. Let's get a set. Let's do this. Let's do nothing. But I'm going to New York on Thursday, and I saw Connor Garnett was going to be there for some camp. I was like, yo, man, let's get it going, because I did play him. He beat me like 15-8, which it was before he blew up. He might beat me even worse now. But I texted him. I was like, hey, man, let's get a grind in. Sure enough, maybe it was his like person who owns his Instagram. It wasn't really him, but he messaged me right back. And I can't get people that I've met in person and like had genuine conversations with to just respond to me. So I find that to be something that I admire. Just like, hey, look, you deserve part of my time. Right?
Yeah.
Like if I message somebody, it doesn't matter if you're a 4-0 player. If you message me, chances are I'm going to respond. Chances are I'm probably not going to play with you, but like I'm at least going to respond, and I'm going to be genuine with you, and I'm going to be like, hey, you deserve 10 seconds of my time.
Yeah.
So anywho, sorry to go off on a tangent and
no, man.
Yeah, talk about how much I love Connor. I don't love Connor Garnett that much. But, I don't know him at all. So yeah.
No, he's a cool guy. He's been on the pod. Sat right there, actually, probably like a year ago.
Very cool.
He's blown up. He's gotten good. I don't know where we went from here, but we were talking about mentality.
Yes.
And I think that confidence is high. It needs to be high to be successful. You asked something about confidence.
So
how do you? It wasn't like how do you build it or something, but it was something along the lines of like, what do you need to do, right? Can you ask that again?
I forget the exact question I asked, to be honest with you, but I think it was something along the lines with when Connor Garnett warmed up Novak Djokovic, his heart was jacked, right? So it's like, how do you manage those emotions? Do you just have to see it, or like?
Yeah. I mean, as I'm in coaching, again, I am going to be transparent in my coaching is like, obviously technique, strategy, mobility. I'm not by trade. I'm not a mental coach, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I coach the game.
Yeah.
I coach the game, but there are specific mental coaches out there, but a lot of them I've also learned a lot from, and I'm going to be, I mean, as I'm growing as a coach too, that's one of the areas that I actually want to, you know, gain more knowledge on and improve. But, you know, the mental game works just like a muscle. You got to train it. You brought up Djokovic, you know, just like him, you know, the most dominant tennis player of all time, you know, training his mind. I've seen him, followed his career. I mean, he's got out of matches just on the mental side, even playing,
no doubt,
playing bad. And that happens all the time. So regardless though, one thing that I can say is that when I was playing tournaments, pretty often, and I started, you know, Ben and all these guys, I started the same time as a lot of these, we'll call it the OG pros.
Sure.
Ben, Tyson. There's not a lot of OG pros left, right? Because a lot of them are on the newer side. But I can tell you, mental game, man, is a huge thing. I've had to work on it. When I was playing tournaments, two things that really helped. You know, I even think about like now as I'm working with players. And players ask me, right? Obviously, the players I'm working with 3-5, 4-0, 4-5, 5-0, right? And they're trying to they're trying to just get to the next level.
Yeah.
And everyone has lost against somebody better, but you always hear that story. Everyone's lost, at least in their perception, they've lost to someone who is worse than them.
For sure.
So a lot of that is mental, but regardless, two things. You know, just really work on that mental game is really huge. But just in my personal kind of journey as I played a lot of tournaments throughout the years, one thing that has helped, and these are not breaking news, but one thing that's helped my tournaments is playing more tournaments.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one. And you mentioned that you're talking about being in that stressful situation, playing these top tournaments. I do think that is really huge. You can play all these local tournaments, and then you show up to a big PPA, big draw, bigger scene.
Yeah.
You're going to feel different feelings. You just need to get used to that kind of environment. And then number two, I do actually think that confidence, I mean, I know confidence builds. It builds. So even if you're getting, let's say you're just, again, very kind of, this is not the greatest example in the world, but let's say you're a rec player and you play with the same group. We'll just keep it really simple. Play with the same group every Saturday, and you get pickled every time. You know, you can, you know, obviously you're not going to feel great. You can go back and you can like, what can I work on? Or you can just be like, oh, I'm just not going to play again, right? One or the other. As you get better, let's say you get 2, 3, 4 points, 5 points, and as you're still losing, but the result is you're getting better. And
Sure.
there's two ways you can actually look at that. If you're that same exact player, you can look at it as still failing, right? Still on the loss, or you can look at it, you're actually improving, but obviously in the win-loss column, it's not, I mean, it's the same, right? But it is way different. So for me, when I was playing tournaments, even if I, you know, lost, because I've had some really, really close matches against some pretty good players, and that helped my confidence a lot. And I use that to get me better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I've had some good wins. I've had some bad losses. I've lost to people that obviously everyone has.
Yep.
Everyone's had bad days.
Yep.
But just really, you know, playing more tournaments, putting yourselves in those situations. And I can tell, and I know that's really tough when you're talking about the amount you spend and travel and all that stuff.
For sure.
So there's that. And then also, the other thing is just gaining confidence when you can, using anything that you can for motivation and to build your confidence is huge. So the mental game. The other thing, see, Matt, I haven't seen you play in a long time. Maybe we'll get on the court together. And I know that you're really like adamant on singles, and you've been training that a lot.
Sure.
The other thing I would look at too is I know you're training hard, and you can outwork everybody, but also I would tell players too, kind of like that kid, that 17-year-old. Sometimes it's just talent. Maybe sometimes it's just a bad day, but training the right way. And I tell players this all the time, like you can be actually training a certain way, but even someone like you, I would recommend that you have someone on the outside like analyze your matches, or just see what you need to work on, or how you're actually training. Like if you're training certain shots, like I coach singles too, like mainly doubles, but I watch a lot of singles. I study it just because I just like the game. I like the cat and mouse. I like just the strategy of it. So I think practicing the shots that you're missing, and practicing different game styles in singles too. Obviously playing with your strengths, but as the singles game has evolved, the power game, it's just going to get more and more powerful with passing shots. But also people are getting smarter covering the court, and including a lot of cat and mouse play. And if that's another thing I would just look at, obviously. And
so it's interesting you said that, because I mean, not just obsessed as far, if I'm not playing, either I'm watching some type of tennis video that's like, because I still relate tennis to pickleball, and they're not, they are very, very similar. It's extreme
technique-wise,
yeah. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, look at how Rafa, and I'm not just watching Rafa or just watching Ben Johns or anything. But I'm like, look how he pulled him off the court. Oh, did you see how? And even in doubles, like professional tennis doubles, you see people kind of getting into these weird like dink points if the point goes long enough. Most of the time, it's like, and by the way, I think this is why pickleball is such a success, because in doubles specifically, people like team sports already. Like if you just look at like worldwide sports in which are,
that's right.
Whew. If you just look at worldwide sports in which are the most popular, then I guess there's not that many individual sports, so maybe that's an unfair comparison. But people like team sports, and people like to get behind teams, right?
Yeah.
So what I see with the MLP and the way it's moving is it's a team sport, and you can get Phoenix behind you. Right, opposed to like, who can you get behind Taylor Fritz? He just made it to the US Open finals, but like, do you really feel genuinely connected to him, opposed to like, let's even just say Tiafoe, or even the person he lost to, Sinner? It's like, not really, you know what I mean? But if the Suns make the NBA finals, it feels like you were part of that. Phoenix is the connection that you have between you and the Phoenix Suns. But anywho, going back to your original point, I'm obsessed, right? Like I'm watching all this stuff over and over again, and I'm thinking to myself, because clearly it's not working at an extreme level, right? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I must have to tailor fit my practice. And if I'm putting in the effort and I'm putting in the work, either I'm just not talented enough. It's possible. Either I'm just not talented enough, I'm not doing the right things, or maybe God's, who knows? There's a ton of possibilities, right? But what you mentioned with that cat and mouse game is, I think probably originally when we first met 2 years ago, you couldn't force me to dink, So I took pickleball, and I took some advice, right? But I really tried to figure it out myself. I was like, what works? Don't listen to people. Actually, in fact, I took the exact opposite. I shouldn't say that. Listen to everybody. Take any advice that you can, but dissect it, dismantle it, and figure out if there's a better way to do this, right? So originally with dinking, and it was my weakness, I thought to myself, okay, I have to avoid getting in dink rallies with players at this level or higher. because it's just not going to work.
You're talking about singles.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about doubles in this.
Okay.
I kind of went off on a tangent.
Got it.
I could relate it back to singles, right? I'm never going to do the Ben Johns drop in and get to the kitchen and like, you know, out touch you. Like I'm going to rip a ball by you. Yeah. I'm going to move really well. I'm going to get in. I'm going to do those things correct. I have now evolved that specific part of my game, and I can see when it's useful, because there's some opportunities, even in singles, in which you're forced to get into cat and mouse. Ben Johns does the best at it. He forces you into that specific type of drill or situation. Yeah. And when I first started, I was like, I can avoid this. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which was totally false. Like I could not avoid it. There's no way, and especially in doubles, but even in singles, you know, in doubles, I was like, all right, look, like we're going to shake and bake every single time. And by the way, I still shake and bake a lot, because I don't want to, like, especially when I'm playing a pro qualifier, I'm not like, hey dude, like we probably have better dinks than these. It's like, no, it's probably my third shot drive. And like,
well, play to your strengths. Nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. But then at the same time, you have to kind of what you were alluding to, which is like making sure you're practicing what works, right? If you're practicing doubles and you're only practicing, you know, your drive, it's probably not going to be super effective. You know what I mean? Or you're practicing doubles and you're like out there squatting and doing like side to side movement. Like it's quite profound, to be honest, when you look at like the people who have succeeded in doubles and like just physically looking at them. Maybe it's an illusion. I mean, just physically looking at some.
They're not the strongest guys. They're not the strongest specimens in the world.
Exactly, but they're far better than I am. But they make it work, and to be honest, that gives me a little bit of hope, because I'm thinking to myself, one, like I can be doing this for a long time, because if I stay in shape and I take care of my body.
If Matt Wright is playing at the highest level, you can too.
I didn't want to mention names, and but yeah, 100%. And so it's an interesting dynamic how another benefit to this game, opposed to virtually any other sport, is the longevity of it. Yeah. Right. It's like, dude, like how old are you?
34.
It's not absurd to think that you haven't hit your peak yet. Yeah. In doubles specifically, maybe singles, maybe a little bit, maybe if you totally.
Well, I mean, look at Djokovic, man.
That's true. That's true.
Let's just talk about that. That's tennis.
Yeah. And so that's
Djokovic. Actually, you're talking about that's funny. That gives me hope. Like I still have at least 3 years of my peak. Looking at him.
Oh, I agree. And maybe even longer when it comes to pickleball. Yeah. Maybe even longer when it comes to doubles pickleball. So that's, I think.
Peaks at 50.
Peaks at 50 for pickleball doubles. Yeah, man. Yeah, that's funny. And so I think when you introduce a sport in which is, because you're still getting a cardiovascular exercise, even if you're just doing low level doubles, like you're getting blood flow, right, which people want, opposed to ping pong. It's like you're not really moving, you know what I mean? But when you look at other sports, you just can't do it past a specific age. You know what I mean? If you want to be serious about it and you want to compete. Sure. If I want to go and play even basketball right now, myself at 29, I go out there and play basketball. It's like, dude, forget about it. The next day I'm like hunched over and I have to take 2 days off, 3 days off of pickleball. Like I just couldn't do it. I guess that's not true. Maybe if I really dedicated myself and I got back and, I maybe, but like right now, I go play basketball. It's game set for 3 or 4 days. I go play singles. I'm like, okay, I burned a lot of calories. I did, I came out here, I exercised at the bare minimum, even if I'm not getting better. So that kind of just ties back into how I came off as kind of like, oh, poor. I didn't, again, I specifically said this isn't me complaining, but I did come off as like, poor me. Like I'm this guy who's, playing all these qualifying tournaments, trying to make a living, totally failing at it, just throwing a bunch of money into what appears to just be like a fire, and having no success, going home pissed, wondering, and not just me, like my peers as well. I'd have to talk to Caden, but like it would be interesting to see, like, I mean, how did you feel like as you played the pro tour?
Yeah, I mean, early on. So it was not what it was today.
But how did you feel when you came back from a match in which, because you were probably in a very similar situation to myself. How did you come back from a match in which you were like, man, I really need that? Because like you must have felt it. I really need this win, because if I don't start climbing, like I might.
You know what? It was different.
Okay.
It's a little different back then.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think obviously in any sport, the financial advantage and backing that certain people have play a big role.
For sure.
So I remember when I was, just to set the stage, completely different game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people were, the top sponsorships could have been paddles at that point, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, so
what is it now, by the way? Is it not paddles that are the top sponsorship?
What do you mean?
Well, paddles, I don't know. Paddles would, if you had to ask me, like, where's the money, I would say it's in paddles.
No, I'm saying the top spot as a sponsored player.
Okay.
I'm saying back in the day, it was like no money. It was like paddles.
My fault. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It was literally that. So
yeah.
No worries. But the game was totally different back then, and it was obviously a lot smaller. The sport has grown in tremendous ways since then, and the financial pressure and the ability, I think that's what made it easier too. I think for everyone back then, it wasn't like everyone's trying to make it their full-time thing, because it wasn't a full-time thing.
Interesting.
It wasn't yet.
Yeah.
Right? As soon, as I've my last tournament was 2 years ago, and this was already obviously when the PPA was going on and all that stuff. But like it just was a totally different game. People were more playing it. I mean, there was still incredible talent, but people were still playing it for the joy of the game and not really knowing, is this really gonna be a full-time thing? I honestly don't think that the actual vision for most pro players were like, I'm gonna actually make a living of this. So it was a little different. Because
we're still in the kind of like topic of a mindset.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the mindset of like pressure, which is like, yo, you need to do this to make a living, like you have a bunch of pressure on you.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the type of mindset that you want, that fire mindset? Or do you think it's more of the mindset in which it sounds like you were more in, which is like, yo, I'm just out here living in the moment, doing this for fun, like, not that much pressure on it, more loose?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Good question. I think as I've coached so many different players, and I've coached players at different levels, different ages. I've coached players that are very hard on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I've coached players that are kind of just take things as they come.
So sorry to interrupt you. Do you see a difference in like what you say, people who are hard on them level? Like, do you see like the better players are more hard on themselves, or in the lower players are less? Is there a connection?
I would say this. There are you can be really hard on yourself and be. I've coached that same player at 3-0 all the way to 5-0.
Oh, very cool.
Right?
Very cool. Yeah.
Then I've also coached a player that can control their emotions a little bit more, and maybe just as a personality, isn't that way for whatever reason, for like growing up or just whatever they've dealt with. We've all dealt with different stuff.
Sure.
But I've coached that player also at every single level, and everyone in between. Mm-hmm. So I would say finding your motivation and what works for you is like super key to like figure out. But I could actually see the pressure. I see it different ways, right? I could see the pressure, all that pressure, like I got to make this work. I got to do this. I could see that actually, and I've seen it work for people.
Yeah.
But I've also seen it destroy people.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you really need to find a balance and kind of know yourself.
Yeah.
I think a big part is kind of knowing who you are and how you handle the pressure. And you can you could shift that motivation a little bit. And like, let's say that is something, the pressure of I got to do good. And again, this happens at 3-5. It's not just as pros. And I got to, whatever, it's your identity, or maybe you put too much pressure on yourself and you're thinking, you're putting everything on it.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that does work for some people.
Yep.
That gives them motivation. But if that doesn't, then you do need to shift and find something else.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
And I think you mentioned something that was interesting. You mentioned identity, right? People do, I mean, not just with pickleball, but with anything in life, they associate them with specific things. I mean, looks are a great example. Like if you're like, let's say you're the most beautiful girl at 24 and you lose that at 30, it's like you lost part of yourself. You know what I mean? And when you reach that specific position in pickleball and you've associated yourself so strongly with pickleball, like everybody you virtually talk to is a pickleball player, and every single person that knows you before that asks about pickleball, and you're doing this all day, and you're like myself, and if you're not on the court, you're like researching stuff, you know what I mean? And so you begin to associate yourself with that specific thing and kind of ignore the things that are arguably more important, which is like, the type of person you are, morals, ethics, what you want to bring into the world. I would make the argument is, I mean, let's say if you gave me the option, like, hey, do you want to be Ben Johns, the #1 pickleball player in the world? But by doing so, you have to, like, I wouldn't say sell your soul, but like sell part of it. Like you have to become a little bit worse of a person. I hope I would have like the...
You're not saying Ben is a worse person, right?
Not at all. I have no idea what type of person Ben Johns is. But I'm saying hypothetically, I shouldn't say Ben Johns. I should say the #1 pick, or you could just say tennis. Let's say tennis. You can be the #1 tennis player in the world, but like you have to do X, Y, and Z things that are like non-objectively like not good. And there's levels to it. I mean, not to get like religious, I'm not specifically religious, but let's take the example of Jesus. Okay, let's say hypothetically this exists, right? I'm not saying it actually happened, but I'm saying like if you're in the desert, right, and you're tempted by the devil and you haven't eaten in like 30 days, and he comes to you and is like, you can rule the entire world, just like, I forget the exact words, but like, just follow me. Like how many people fail at that? And sorry to keep bringing that point back around, but in my opinion, this is a lot of the times what's happened to people is they kind of sell themselves or they sell other people out for their self-interest. And my worry is because, and this happens in, I mean, every single institution basically has this. If you look at the way corporations are structured, they could be structured, in my opinion, way better, right? You have all these corporations who are just looking out for their best interests and willing to do things that are non-objectively not good for the people. So when you begin to bring it full circle, when you bring it to your identity and you begin to identify yourself with riches or with other things, I think that's when you become a little bit morally breakable. And when you want things, I mean, they say desire is suffering or something like this. I forget. But when you desire something so much, and you might even be suffering for it, you're much more likely to go out and, by the way, I'm not saying that using a legal paddle is super immoral or anything like that, but like if I had the opportunity to, like, let's say you can win this match using an illegal paddle, let's say they give me a gearbox or something.
Sure. You
can win this match, but if you use a legal paddle, you're going to lose this match. I would be interested to see how many people take that loss instead of say to themselves, look, this is the right thing to do. Okay, I'm going to play on fair because we kind of talked about this briefly. How many people actually want to break the rules and how many people are kind of forced to break the rules? So, anywho, I think identity is a very big thing. And I think that even if we want to go all the way back, if you have a strong sense of self and you're very internally strong, I think that would be one of the greatest strengths as far as mindset goes. Like I can imagine if you're, let's say, playing in front of 50,000 people and the world is watching, and it's break point, you aren't so concerned with the outcome. You're able to be more in the moment, not because you don't want it more or because of any of these other things, but because you don't allow that specific moment or that specific match or that specific situation to define you. You don't allow your pickleball skill, your tennis skill, or any of those things to define you. You allow other things to define you.
Yeah.
And so I think when you get...
Well, just really quick, and maybe we'll probably have to wrap up soon.
Yeah.
Matt, but on the mental game you were asking, I think that is a big thing. We talked about a little bit identity. I like what you said there on the pressure. Let's say, how are these pros, whether it's in pickleball or in tennis or in other sports, how are they actually able to perform at a really high level with a lot of people watching them?
Yeah.
And the very simple answer is they're not thinking about the people that are watching them.
Yep,
right?
Yep, spot on.
So the very simple example is the focus, and it is again just taking everything external away and actually just focusing on the task at hand.
And so I'm kind of trying to dismantle that and say, like, how do you get to that specific in the moment type of feeling, right? And it would start out by kind of what you mentioned, which is like your identification and who you think you are. And if you can kind of separate yourself from outcomes and what people view you as, because you have a self-identity and then an external identity.
Yeah.
Right? I think Carl Jung calls it like the true self, and then like the persona. The persona is like the vision that other people have of you, right? So if you're not so concerned with your persona, that match isn't gonna affect you that much, as much as somebody who strongly associates themselves with what other people think of them. Yeah. And that could help you as far as like the mindset goes. So it could be at any level, right? If you're a 4-0 and you think to yourself like, I really want to win this match because if I win this match, then I'm going to be I'm going to be like a 5-0. This person's like a 5-2. Right, you playing like, okay, if I win this match, and so you're constantly you could even make the argument that like, why is it a good thing to be a 5? Why is it a good thing to be a great pickleball player? And if you think about it from that perspective, and by the way, I don't think that this is the right mentality, but you can make the argument that it would definitely cool you down. Let's say you're the type of person, you mentioned balance. You're the type of person who like takes everything super seriously and has all these pressures on you. Well, this might be a tool in order to take those pressures off of you by saying, look, I shouldn't identify myself with being a pickleball player. I should have identified myself with all the good things that I do and all the right things that I want to do.
Yeah, I like that.
Opposed to so focused on one specific part of your identity, which is pickleball. Now, obviously, if you're on the other end and you're too cold, maybe you need to, you need to get smacked around a little bit and feel the fire. And
I like that, man. So next time or next tournament you play, which route are you gonna go? That's really good, man.
I question one, kind of like who I am. One, right? It's like, do I even have much of a say in the way I react, right? Like, because there are all these external circumstances that define you, So like, if I'm in a match and I really want to win, can I use that, or is it just kind of like, look, these are the cards that I was dealt, and if I go out there and I act like and break my racket and throw a temper tantrum, is that avoidable? Or is this thing that we think of ourselves, because I think most people identify themselves as kind of like this, like almost like spotlight, right? Where it's like, you're not, some people like, you're like your thoughts, but you think of yourself as like this controller of your mind, right? But then that controller of your mind is just another thought in your mind in a weird way. I guess we're getting a little bit deep here, but anywho, the point is when I think about trying to do specific things in matches with my mindset, I realized that a lot of it is out of my control. And if I act like what people might think of as like a jackass, it's not always it's not always that. It's not that I can control that. It's not that everybody can control that. It's just it happens to be who I am and where I am.
No, I like it. I like it. And we'll end it with this. Guys, if you like this really deep conversation, maybe leave a comment below, huh?
Yeah, there we go.
Matt, thanks for having you on. I'll leave it with this. I know we talked about a lot of things. My son Josiah, he's only 8, but he started playing pickleball.
Oh, cool.
And you know, for whatever it's worth, I might change this in the future.
Yeah.
But you know, as he's playing, and he has kind of traits that I have, like he gets frustrated when he misses, and like all that stuff, very human nature stuff.
Sure.
Right? But you know, I tell him 3 things before he goes into practice or a game. Right. Number 1, work hard.
Sure.
Like try your hardest.
Yeah.
Number 2, have a good attitude.
Yeah.
'Cause that's what we're working on.
Sure.
And then number 3, which I'm currently adding, is believe.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I love what you said about outcome, and because really you have a percentage of control of the outcome.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. At some level.
You know,
arguably.
Yeah, I mean, you have a percentage. It's not full. I don't know what percentage it is. I mean, if you really want to dial it in, it's probably 50-50 because the other opponent also has, you know, factors which could, you know, change the match. But again, those 3 things are, you know, is what I have them focus on. And again, I think that helps, not really focusing on the outcome. And I just think that that's so much harder, or so much easier said than done. But you know, maybe we can talk more about the mental game next time, or get an update on yours, man. To.
So I'll end with 2 things.
Go ahead.
One is kind of like the answer to your point about outcome. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that focusing on outcomes can negatively impact you, and specific people like myself are forced to focus on outcomes more than others, right? Because you have all this weight on your shoulders, which is like, if you get the desired outcome that you want, now you're able to provide, you know, I mean, food is a pretty basic necessity. Food, rent, insurance, etc. You know, put some pressure off of my parents, you know, all this type of stuff. But also saying that, I think as a pickleball community, and anybody who is in a privileged position, because if we look at pickleball players, the vast majority of the times they're in a privileged position, including myself, if you want to take, you know, the world into perspective. Yeah. I think it would be awesome to see the pickleball community get behind something that actually like benefits others, right? Because we're in that privileged position. So I'm not going to like plug my product, but, you know, I can say for certain that I am going to be creating paddles, you know, all these different type of things, maybe tournaments as well, that are going to donate money to Charity Water, in which is a charity in which builds wells and clean drinking water for people who don't have it. So when we think about that type of perspective, which could play into the mindset as well, when we think about that perspective, right, and you say, okay, do you need fire? Do you need ice? I mean, if you're looking at a paddle and you see, oh, this, if my success is tied into people with clean drinking water, that's a lot of fire. That's a lot of reason to fight. You know what I mean? But then you can also look at it from the other perspective, and you can say, okay, these people literally don't have clean drinking water. Who am I to get upset about the outcome of a random match here? But anywho, that's...
I like that, man. Cool. Well, we talked about a lot of things today, Matt. Hopefully, maybe we'll hop on the court soon. And man, appreciate you coming on.
I love to, Jordan. Thank you.
All right, dude. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I know it was a little different. We talked about a lot of different topics. We'll be back with regular programming next week. But no, Matt was great to have on. Comment below your thoughts on everything. And
Decentralized pickleball, help out the unprivileged people. That's my message for today's
there you go
conversation.
All right, thanks so much everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Jordan.